The night cracked with a piercing cry, echoing through the crumbling alley where Emma stumbled barefoot, clutching her torn dress as though it could shield her from the world's cruelty. The storm raged, raindrops slashing against her face like shards of glass, but her voice broke louder, carrying despair through the deserted streets. She whispered to herself, "Why does life punish me so?" As though the sky might answer. A shadow moved. Mr. Cole, the landlord, watching her with cold eyes, unmoved by her suffering. He said, "You are late with rent again, and excuses mean nothing." Emma's breath shook, fear and exhaustion etched into her trembling frame, but deep inside, something hardened. The storm outside mirrored the storm in her heart, and though tears blurred her sight, a fire kindled silently within her. She thought, "No one is coming. If I am to survive, I must save myself." And so, in that moment of agony, with thunder rolling and lightning tearing the sky apart, the girl who had always waited for rescue began her journey into becoming her own savior. Morning came, but Emma's body ached from the storm's punishment. She trudged back to her crumbling apartment, the walls stained and windows broken, carrying a bucket of rainwater she had collected through the night. Her neighbors watched her with quiet pity, whispers trailing after her like ghosts. A child asked, "Why does she always look so sad?" And a mother hushed them quickly, shaking her head. Emma ignored them, her eyes fixed on the cracked stairwell, each step creaking under her weight. Hunger gnawed at her, but she tightened her jaw, refusing to show weakness. She thought of her late mother who once said, "Strength is not given, it is built." The memory carved into her heart as she collapsed onto the floor inside her room, staring at the leaking roof and the single candle burning dimly. The world seemed to press down on her, but even then, her heart whispered a vow she could barely believe. She would endure. Emma lit the small candle in her room, its fragile flame trembling as though mirroring her spirit. She sat on the floor, clutching her knees, staring at the picture of her mother resting against the wall. The frame was cracked, but the smile on the woman's face remained whole. Emma whispered, "I will not break like you did. I will rise." Her voice cracked, but there was strength in it. Hunger twisted her stomach again, and she remembered how her mother sacrificed meals so she could eat. The thought tore her heart, but planted resolve. The room smelled of damp wood, mildew creeping into every corner, yet that fragile flame on the candlelight felt like defiance against the darkness. Emma pressed her hand over her chest, feeling her heart beat, reminding herself she was alive, and as long as she breathed, hope would flicker with her. Outside, the city roared with life, oblivious to her pain. Carriages rattled, people shouted, markets buzzed, yet in her tiny room, Emma's world stood still. She pressed her forehead against the cold window pane, fogging the glass with her breath. The laughter outside only deepened the hollow inside her. A neighbor knocked softly, offering a stale piece of bread. Emma forced a smile, saying, "Thank you, this means more than you know." She broke the bread into small pieces, savoring each bite like a feast, her body trembling as hunger eased. The act of kindness sparked a fragile warmth within her, reminding her that even in cruelty, humanity survived. Yet shadows still whispered, reminding her of debts owed and dangers waiting, but for one fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe tomorrow could hold light. As night returned, Emma walked alone to the riverbank, staring at the reflection of the moon on rippling water. She whispered, "I cannot stay in this life forever." Her heart ached, but the silence of the river wrapped her in fragile comfort. She remembered her mother's stories of strong women who fought for survival, women who built their strength from ashes. Emma clenched her fists, declaring in her heart that she would not die nameless in poverty. The wind carried her vow across the dark water, the moon shimmering brighter as though listening. She thought of Cole's words, of hunger's grip, of betrayal lurking in neighbors' whispers, yet she also thought of courage waiting to be claimed. And for the first time, she believed change might come, not from rescue, but from her own hands. Emma rose before dawn, her stomach hollow yet her spirit unwilling to surrender. She walked to the factory gates, where smoke already curled into the pale sky. Workers lined up, their faces grim, each step a march into exhaustion. The foreman barked orders, his tone harsh and unyielding, but Emma kept her eyes low, determined not to be seen as weak. Her hands were blistered, yet she pressed them together and whispered, "One more day. I can endure one more day." The machines roared, drowning out her voice, but her vow clung tightly inside her chest. Poverty had bound her, yet each lash of hardship carved a sharper edge within her. Though shadows of despair lingered, the faintest thread of defiance flickered quietly, unbroken by the noise of the world. Inside, the factory clanged with deafening rhythm, sparks flying as machines devoured both steel and souls. Emma worked at a loom, her fingers raw, each movement cutting into her skin. A fellow worker whispered, "Careful, the overseer watches every mistake." She nodded, forcing a smile that barely reached her lips. Hours blurred into a haze of sweat and smoke, her lungs burning with every breath. She thought of her late mother's voice, telling her to be patient, but patience here felt like slow death. The overseer's footsteps echoed, and Emma bent deeper into her work, heart pounding, determined to hide her weakness. In her silence, she began to dream not of escape but of strength that could one day lift her beyond these chains. By midday, Emma's strength faltered, her head spinning with hunger. She staggered, nearly tangling the threads. A sharp voice snapped, "Useless girl, work faster or be replaced." It was Mr. Cole, walking the floor with cold detachment. His eyes cut through her, making her feel smaller than the dust under his boot. Emma clenched her teeth, whispering inside, "You will not crush me." The words gave her enough power to steady her trembling hands. Around her, workers avoided eye contact, each one fearing the same wrath. Yet Emma lifted her gaze for a heartbeat, staring back at him with quiet defiance. For the first time, she realized that survival was not just about enduring, but daring to resist silently, even under the gaze of cruelty. When the whistle blew, Emma stepped outside, collapsing against a wall as the air tasted less poisoned. She closed her eyes, her body aching, but in the hum of exhausted workers around her, she found a strange kinship. A young man named Daniel offered her a small piece of bread, saying, "It's not much, but share it." She looked at him, startled by his kindness, and whispered, "Thank you." The taste was plain, but to Emma it felt like hope disguised as food. For a fleeting moment, she felt less alone, her heart stirred by the possibility that not everyone in this world was cruel. Daniel smiled faintly, and though silence settled between them, Emma knew this bond, however small, was a lifeline she had longed for. That night, Emma returned home with aching bones yet a lighter spirit. She placed the bread crust Daniel had shared into her pocket, unwilling to consume it all. Lighting her candle, she whispered, "Perhaps there is kindness left in this world." She held her mother's picture close, her voice trembling but resolute. "I will not remain trapped forever." The leaking roof dripped steadily, each drop echoing like a reminder of her fragile existence. Yet the flame's glow cast her shadow tall on the wall, a vision of strength she did not yet fully believe in. She lay down, exhaustion pulling her under, but her final thought before sleep was simple and unyielding. The world might push her down, but she would rise again. Emma awoke with heavy eyes, her body sore but her spirit restless. She returned to the factory, yet her mind wandered toward Daniel's quiet kindness. The noise of machines dulled, replaced by the memory of his words. When he passed by her station and whispered, "You're stronger than you believe," something in her heart stirred. No one had spoken such faith in her before. The overseer glared suspiciously, barking, less talking, more working. She bent low, hands raw against the loom, but inside she whispered, "Perhaps I can be more." The hours stretched mercilessly, yet hope slipped into her thoughts like light breaking through cracks in stone. For the first time in years, Emma wondered if life might hold something beyond survival. At lunch break, Emma sat on the cold steps outside, clutching a small crust of bread. Daniel joined her, offering half of his meager ration. She hesitated, then accepted, whispering, "I don't deserve this." He smiled faintly, replying, "No one deserves suffering." The words pierced deeper than kindness, revealing a truth she had long denied. She studied him, seeing not just a friend, but someone who believed she was worthy of more than pain. Workers around them muttered, weary and distrustful of closeness, yet Emma felt a fragile warmth in her chest. For the first time, she laughed softly, the sound strange to her own ears, as if her spirit remembered joy after years of silence. Later that evening, Emma visited the riverbank again, the moon shimmering like a silent witness. She replayed Daniel's words, "You are stronger than you believe." She whispered them aloud, testing their weight against her doubt. Her reflection trembled in the dark water, fragile yet unbroken. A distant church bell rang, echoing across the still night, and Emma closed her eyes, imagining a future where she was no longer trapped. She clenched her fists, whispering, "I will not live as a shadow." The wind rushed over her, carrying the scent of smoke and wet earth, and for a moment she felt the world urging her forward. Her loneliness remained, but now it carried a faint spark of possibility. The next day, Emma's world shifted when she encountered Father Alden, an older man known for offering wisdom to the poor. He found her near the church steps, exhaustion painted across her face. "Child," he said gently, "strength does not grow in comfort but in struggle." She looked at him, uncertain whether to trust his words. His eyes held the weight of years, lines carved by hardship, yet softened by compassion. Emma whispered, "I am tired of being nothing." Father Alden placed a hand on her shoulder, replying, "Then rise, and become something the world cannot ignore." His voice lingered in her heart long after he walked away, fusing with Daniel's kindness, shaping her belief that perhaps her fate was not sealed. That night, Emma lay awake on the wooden floor, staring at the flickering candle flame. She whispered Daniel's words, then Father Alden's, weaving them into a fragile vow. "I will not die in these walls," she said to the darkness. Her body trembled with fatigue, but her spirit clung stubbornly to hope. She clutched her mother's picture, pressing it to her chest, and imagined a life where her shadow stood tall, not bowed. The roof dripped steadily, each drop like a drumbeat of determination. Sleep finally pulled her under, but in her dream, she stood beneath the storm once again, not as a victim, but as someone preparing to rise. The world had begun to whisper change, and Emma was listening. Emma's world shifted when Daniel's smile grew colder in the days that followed. She noticed him whispering with Mr. Cole, their eyes occasionally darting toward her. A heaviness clung to her chest, though she tried to dismiss the fear as paranoia. One night after work, she discovered Daniel outside the factory, handing over a small coin purse to Cole. Her heart hammered, whispering, "No, it cannot be." She stepped closer, hearing Daniel say, "She trusts me, and through her you'll get what you want." Emma froze, the words slicing deeper than hunger ever had. The man she believed in, the one who gave her hope, had sold her trust for survival. Tears blurred her eyes, but she bit her lip until blood filled her mouth, refusing to cry aloud. Betrayal was sharper than poverty's claws, and in that moment Emma's fragile warmth cracked, leaving her trembling between rage and despair. Emma walked home with heavy steps, her chest hollow, each footfall echoing betrayal. She remembered Daniel's bread, his soft words, and realized they were poisoned gifts. She whispered, "How could I have been so blind?" Inside her room she tore at the hem of her dress in fury, shaking with the weight of betrayal. Her mother's picture slipped from her lap and shattered further, glass cutting her hand. She stared at the blood pooling on her palm, pain sharp but grounding. "I trusted him," she murmured, rage mixing with grief. For hours she sat in silence, the flickering candle casting her trembling form against the walls. Hunger had taught her endurance, but betrayal taught her fury. In that fury, a new vow hardened. She would never again place her survival in the hands of another. At the factory, the next day, Daniel approached with his usual faint smile, pretending nothing had changed. "Emma, you seem distant," he said softly. She forced a hollow smile, replying, "I am simply tired." Inside her, rage burned, but she buried it beneath cold silence. Every glance he gave her felt like poison, every word a dagger wrapped in honey. She watched his hands move at the loom, recalling how those same hands betrayed her in shadows. Cole passed by, his gaze flicking between them knowingly, lips curling in cruel amusement. Emma clenched her fists under the table, nails digging deep into her skin. She whispered to herself, "Never again." The betrayal had stripped her heart raw, but within the wound she felt something dangerous growing, a fire that would not die. That evening, Emma confronted Daniel by the river where they once shared laughter. Her voice shook but carried steel. "Why betray me?" Daniel's smile faltered before hardening. "We all survive how we can," he muttered, eyes refusing to meet hers. She stepped closer, tears burning, whispering, "You were different." He snapped back, "No one is different. Survival has no loyalty." His words shattered the last piece of trust she clung to. She felt her chest collapse, but she refused to crumble before him. "Then I will survive without you," she said, her tone sharp as broken glass. Daniel turned away, but she stood firm, fists clenched, her silhouette etched against the moonlit water. Betrayal had stolen her hope, but it left behind a blade of defiance sharper than fear. Emma returned to her small room, shoulders shaking, but she no longer wept. She sat by the flickering candle whispering, "I trusted him and he destroyed me." Her voice grew louder, almost defiant, "But I am not destroyed." She pressed her hand against the scar left by broken glass, blood crusted into her palm, and stared at the flame. The betrayal had broken something inside her, but in its place, it birthed resolve. She whispered to her mother's picture, "I will rise, and no one will use me again." The leaking roof dripped as though keeping time with her vow. For the first time, Emma felt her pain transform into something sharper, stronger. Her suffering was no longer a chain, it was the fire that would forge her strength. The following week, whispers spread among workers that Emma's family history was not as it seemed. One evening, Father Alden approached her with a heavy face. "There is something you must know," he said gently. He explained that her father had once worked for Cole, betrayed by him and cast aside, leaving Emma and her mother in ruin. Emma staggered back, her voice breaking. "Hey, destroyed my family too?" The truth tore through her like thunder splitting the earth. Every hardship, every hunger, every tear was tangled with Cole's cruelty. Her fists trembled as she whispered, "He took everything from me." Father Alden bowed his head, "But you still live, and that is your weapon." Emma felt rage surge with clarity. The man who loomed over her life was not just an oppressor, he was the very architect of her suffering. Emma returned to the factory the next day, her chest burning with new fury. She stared at Cole from across the floor, the truth echoing louder than the roar of machines. Every insult he hurled now rang hollow, every sneer sharpened her resolve. She whispered to herself, "You destroyed my father, but you will not destroy me." Workers glanced at her, sensing the storm behind her eyes. Daniel avoided her gaze, guilt shadowing his face. Emma ignored him, her focus locked on the man who had cast her family into misery. Each thread she wove on the loom became a vow, each movement a promise that one day she would cut the cords of his control. She was no longer just surviving, she was preparing for war. That night, Emma sat by the river, the moonlight casting her reflection across rippling water. She whispered to her mother's memory, "He took father, he took you, but he will not take me." Her voice trembled, but grew stronger with each word. She clenched her fists, feeling the scar on her palm throb like a reminder of pain now transformed. "I will fight him with every breath," she vowed. The wind howled, carrying her words across the dark current, and she felt as though the river itself listened. For the first time, Emma did not feel small. She saw herself reflected not as a victim, but as a figure rising from shadow into strength. Her pain had finally revealed its true face. It was fuel, and she was ready to burn brighter than the cruelty that sought to break her. Days later, Emma overheard Cole boasting to the overseer about breaking her father's spirit. Her chest tightened, every word stoking fury. She stepped forward, whispering under her breath, No more silence. Though fear gnawed at her, she no longer shrank away. When Cole passed her, sneering as always, Emma lifted her head and locked eyes with him. For a moment, the overseer gasped at her defiance. Cole's smirk faltered, replaced by irritation. Emma whispered, "You will see me rise." Though her words were quiet, the strength in them roared louder than machines. Workers nearby looked at her differently, as though recognizing the spark of rebellion. For the first time, Emma was no longer invisible, she was dangerous. That night, Emma lit her candle and placed the broken frame of her parents before her. She whispered, "You were taken by his cruelty, but I will not be." Her eyes burned with tears, but behind them was fire. She pressed her scarred palm against the floorboard, saying, "Every wound has become my strength." The leaking roof dripped steadily, but she no longer heard despair in its rhythm, only resolve. She whispered to the silence, "I will rise, I will fight, I will endure." The candle flame flickered tall, casting her shadow like a giant across the walls. Emma breathed deeply, no longer the girl waiting to be saved, but the woman preparing to claim her fate. Betrayal and truth had crushed her innocence, but they had built her into her own savior. The factory's air was heavier than ever, machines roaring like beasts. Emma's hands shook, not from fear but from fury burning inside her. Cole barked orders, striding across the floor with arrogant certainty. Workers lowered their heads, but Emma lifted hers, her gaze following him. She whispered to herself, "He cannot own me." Daniel lingered nearby, guilt flickering in his eyes, as though begging for forgiveness. Emma ignored him, her focus sharp as steel. When Cole sneered, "You are nothing but a broken girl," Emma's heart pounded, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. For the first time, her silence was not surrender. It was defiance carved into stone. Around her, workers shifted, sensing something changing. Emma's fire had become visible, and it unsettled even the man who once crushed her family. That night, Emma returned to the riverbank, moonlight shimmering like a blade on the water's surface. She fell to her knees, whispering to the night, "I cannot carry this alone." Yet her own words echoed back as if the river refused to accept weakness. She clutched her scarred palm, feeling the sting of old wounds. Then she remembered Father Alden's words, "Strength grows in struggle." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled faintly, whispering, "Then let me grow." The wind rushed across the bank, rippling the water like a heartbeat, and Emma rose slowly to her feet. For the first time she felt not only anger, but clarity. The battle was no longer just against Cole. It was against the fear that had lived inside her since childhood. That fear was dying. The next day, Cole summoned Emma, his eyes cold as stone. "You dare challenge me," he snarled, voice echoing through the factory. Workers froze, silence heavier than the smoke around them. Emma's chest burned, but she held her ground. "You took my father, you broke my family, but you will not break me." Her words cut through the air, sharp as thunder. Cole's lips curled in disdain. "You are weak," he spat. Emma's voice rose louder, trembling but unyielding. "I am stronger than you ever wanted me to be." Gasps rippled through the room, workers daring to glance up, inspired by her fire. For the first time Cole faltered, eyes narrowing at a girl no longer afraid to speak. In her defiance, Emma had turned her pain into a weapon, and the battle had begun. Cole stormed toward her, his shadow towering, but Emma did not retreat. Her body trembled, yet her eyes blazed. "You are finished," he growled, reaching to strike her. A worker gasped, but Emma raised her scarred hand, stopping him mid-motion. "I have nothing left to lose," she said, voice steady as steel. For a moment, Cole froze, his power unraveling under her resolve. Workers murmured softly, a spark of rebellion spreading among them. Daniel stepped forward, shame heavy on his face, whispering, "She is right." Cole's fury burned hotter, but Emma's voice silenced him. "You cannot break what you did not build." The hall vibrated with her words, louder than the machines, louder than fear itself. Emma had faced him, and though danger still loomed, she knew she was no longer the powerless girl he controlled. That night, Emma collapsed in her room, body aching but spirit unbroken. She whispered, "I faced him, and I still stand." The candle flickered tall, its light stretching her shadow across the wall. She pressed the broken photo frame of her parents close, whispering, "I carry you with me." Her scarred palm rested over her heart, each beat steady, fierce. The storm outside rattled the windows, but Emma did not flinch. Instead she whispered to the thunder, "I am not afraid anymore." For the first time, she felt strength pulsing inside her like fire, untamed but alive. Betrayal had wounded her, truth had shattered her, but defiance had remade her. She closed her eyes, whispering one final vow, "Tomorrow I will rise higher." Sleep took her, but her dream was no longer of survival. It was of victory. Morning light spilled through Emma's broken window, casting gold across her weary face. She rose slowly, body aching but mind sharp with purpose. She whispered, "Today is not survival. Today is change." She tied her hair back firmly, pulling on her worn coat with steady hands. Each movement felt deliberate, each step a declaration that she was no longer bound. The city outside bustled, but Emma walked through the streets with her head high, ignoring whispers that once crushed her spirit. The people who pitied her now stared with quiet awe. The girl who bent beneath storms now walked as though the storm had become her ally. Inside her chest, the fire burned brighter, guiding her toward a destiny she was finally ready to claim. At the factory gates, Emma stood tall, no longer blending into the crowd of weary workers. She whispered to herself, "This ends now." Cole appeared, sneer fixed on his lips, but his eyes flickered with unease at her unbroken gaze. The overseer shifted nervously as workers gathered, watching silently. Emma stepped forward, her voice strong, "You have fed on our suffering long enough." Cole laughed coldly, but the sound rang hollow against her fire. She pointed to the factory doors, whispering, "No more chains." Murmurs rippled through the workers, courage igniting in their hearts. For the first time, Emma was not alone in her defiance. She had become a spark, and sparks can burn even the cruelest empires. Inside the factory, Emma's voice rose above the roar of machines. "We are more than tools," she cried, her words echoing through the hall. Workers froze, startled, then slowly lifted their heads. Cole shouted, "Silence her!" But no one moved. Daniel stepped forward, his voice trembling yet firm. "She speaks truth." Emma's eyes met his, pain and betrayal still present, but she nodded faintly. Her voice thundered, "We will not bow to cruelty." The hall erupted in murmurs of agreement, courage spreading like wildfire. Cole's face reddened with fury, but his power faltered as dozens of eyes turned against him. For the first time, Emma was not only her own savior, she was the voice of many. The workers rallied, their voices echoing in unison, shaking walls once filled only with machines. Cole shouted, "You will regret this," but his words drowned beneath the roar of their defiance. Emma stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You cannot destroy what you did not build," she declared, voice carrying like thunder. Cole's figure shrank, no longer a towering oppressor but a desperate man losing his grip. The overseer dropped his gaze, unwilling to support him. Emma stood at the center, scarred palm raised high, a symbol of survival transformed into power. For the first time, the factory was not Cole's empire, it was theirs. In that moment, Emma knew her journey had brought her here, not as a victim, but as the one who lit the fire of freedom. That night, Emma stood once again by the river, moonlight painting her reflection. She whispered, "I am no longer waiting to be saved." Her voice was steady, firm, filled with the weight of survival and the power of transformation. She closed her eyes, clutching her mother's broken frame, and whispered, "I saved myself." The wind rustled her hair, carrying her vow into the night. Behind her lay hunger, betrayal, and cruelty, but before her stretched a path of strength, carved by her own hands. She opened her eyes, staring at the horizon where dawn waited. Her shadow stretched tall across the river's edge, no longer fragile, but strong. Emma breathed deeply, her journey complete. She was no longer the girl in the storm. She was the woman who rose from it.